While sorting through my father's belongings, I found his bank records. Medical bill $80,000, sister's car $35,000, my name was listed with $0, not worth it. I asked my aunt about it and she whispered, "He always said you were a mistake." My chest tightened as I pretended to laugh. A week later, my boss asked if I was okay because I'd been crying in the break room. "You okay, Sam?" my aunt asked, stepping carefully over the boxes piled in Dad's living room. I held up the crumpled paper, Dad's hand-scrawled list of expenses. Right at the bottom, in black ink, my name, $0, not worth it. Aunt Margot stared at it, then at me, her face folding into something between sadness and exhaustion. She leaned in close and whispered like a secret, "He always said you were a mistake." I laughed. A brittle, broken sound that didn't feel real. My hands shook so badly I had to shove them into my jacket pockets. Later that week, my boss found me crying in the break room, trying to hold myself together with coffee and denial. I didn't want to come back to Barton, Vermont. I never thought I'd set foot in that house again, not unless it was burning down and someone needed to make sure the flames finished the job. But when my father died, a sudden, unceremonious heart attack at 67, I got the call because there was no one else. My sister, Valerie, had washed her hands of the whole family years ago, and Aunt Margot was too old to deal with cleaning out a 3-bedroom tomb stuffed with decades of bitterness and neglect. So it was me. It's always been me. I took a week off from my job at an insurance firm in Montpelier, packed a sad overnight bag into my beat-up Corolla, and drove 2 hours north into a place where the trees were taller than the houses and everyone remembered the worst thing you did in high school. When I pulled up, the driveway was buried under a few feet of dirty snow. Typical. I parked on the street and stood there for a minute, just looking at the house. It sagged a little to one side like even the foundation had given up trying. Inside, the air was stale. The heater rattled in the walls like an old man coughing. Nothing had changed. Same dusty furniture. Same threadbare carpet. Same collection of empty beer bottles Dad used to pretend was decorative. The first few days, I worked like a machine. Room by room, tossing old junk into trash bags, sorting papers into piles marked keep and burn. It was on the third day, in the office behind the broken bookshelf, that I found the safe. It was hidden so lazily it almost made me laugh. I knew the combination instantly, my mother's birthday, the only woman Dad ever loved and lost. Inside, birth certificates, some old photos, a rusted pocket blade, and a thick manila folder marked simply, records. I sat down cross-legged on the stained carpet and opened it. Most of it was boring, mortgage statements, tax returns, old medical bills. But tucked toward the back, there was a handwritten list. At the top, underlined twice, expenses. Valerie's medical bills, $80,000 Valerie's car, $35,000 Valerie's college loan, $42,000 Samuel, me, $0, not worth it. There was no mistaking it. My name, right there at the bottom, with a cold, final note beside it. Not worth it. The room tilted for a second. I felt like I might vomit. Or scream. Or tear the whole house down with my bare hands. Instead, I just sat there, the paper trembling in my hands, staring at a truth I think some part of me had always known. The front door creaked. Aunt Margot called out, "Sam?" I shoved the folder back into the safe, but kept the paper. I don't know why. Proof, maybe. Something tangible to explain why I'd spent 30 years feeling like a ghost at my own family's dinner table. She found me sitting on the floor, back against the wall, eyes red. "You okay, Sam?" she asked gently. I held out the paper without saying anything. Her mouth tightened when she saw it. She came closer, knelt beside me, and whispered like someone confessing to a crime, "He always said you were a mistake." The words dropped into my lap like a stone. Heavy. Irrefutable. I laughed. Short, sharp, and ugly. It scared even me. Aunt Margot reached out like she wanted to touch my shoulder, but thought better of it. She just stood up and left quietly, letting the door click shut behind her. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, throwing random junk into boxes, barely noticing what I kept and what I tossed. That night, lying on the couch in the living room under a threadbare blanket, I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, wondering how you mourn someone who never really saw you. The next morning, I called Valerie. I don't know what I expected. Sympathy? Anger? Some kind of shared grief? She answered on the third ring, voice groggy. What? I found Dad's records, I said. My throat felt raw, scraped from too much silence. There was a pause. Yeah? Did you know he thought I was a mistake? Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, she exhaled sharply. Sam, it doesn't matter. But you knew. Yeah, she said, voice flat. I knew. I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. So I hung up. The next few days blurred together. More boxes. More trash bags. More empty, hollow hours. I finished cleaning out the house by Friday. On my way out, I left the key on the kitchen counter and took one last look around. The place looked even smaller without the furniture, as if it had been holding its breath all these years and could finally exhale. I drove away without looking back. Back in Montpelier, I tried to slip back into my old life like nothing had happened. Wake up. Go to work. Make small talk with coworkers. Pretend. But grief has a funny way of leaking through the cracks. A week later, I found myself standing in the break room at work, clutching a paper cup of stale coffee, trying to breathe through another panic attack. Mr. Hayward, my boss, walked in. He was usually all business, shirt always pressed, tie too tight, words sharp as a stapler. But when he saw me, he stopped short. You okay, Sam? He asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. Tried to summon a smile. Failed. He didn't press. Just walked over, sat down across from me at the tiny lunch table, and waited. I told him everything. About the house. The list. The words Aunt Margot whispered. The phone call with Valerie. How it felt like my whole life had been summed up in a sentence, not worth it. When I finally ran out of words, he nodded slowly. You know, he said, looking at the cheap plastic clock on the wall like it might give him the right words, sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most, just can't. He shrugged like it wasn't profound, but it was. They're broken, he added. Doesn't mean you are. I didn't say anything. Just stared at the floor and tried not to cry again. I got through the rest of the workday somehow. When I got home that night, I collapsed onto my couch, still in my work clothes, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. Jasper, my dog, jumped up next to me, resting his head on my chest like he could feel the weight pressing down on me. It had been almost a month since Dad's funeral, but it still felt raw, like the kind of wound you bump into by accident and then pretend didn't hurt. The crumpled list was tucked away in my nightstand drawer. I hadn't been able to throw it out. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that a few bitter words scribbled on a piece of paper didn't define me, but late at night, when everything else was quiet, it still whispered to me. Not worth it. I started seeing a therapist a few weeks after that morning in the break room. Dr. Lowell was a kind woman in her 60s who wore too many bracelets and spoke softly like she was always trying to calm a skittish animal. The first few sessions, I barely talked. I sat on the overstuffed couch in her office, staring at the dusty bookshelf behind her, feeling like I was made of glass. Eventually, the words came out. About growing up in that house. How Dad had always been distant with me, like I was an obligation he had to manage rather than a person he wanted to know. How he lit up around Valerie, going to her soccer games, teaching her how to drive, paying for her college tuition, but couldn't even remember my birthday half the time. I told her about the list. About the words. Dr. Lowell listened without interrupting. She didn't try to excuse it or sugarcoat it. She just let the silence sit between us like something sacred. At the end of one session, she leaned forward slightly and said, "You know, Sam, sometimes surviving a family like yours is a kind of success all on its own." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Life didn't magically get better. There was no dramatic moment where the pain disappeared. But slowly, I started moving through the world differently. I took longer walks with Jasper. I went to the farmer's market on Saturdays, even if it was just to wander around and smell fresh bread and soap made with goat's milk. I even joined a woodworking class at the community center, though my first few attempts at making a birdhouse looked like something out of a horror movie. Valerie called again in early May. This time, I answered. Her voice was careful, like she was picking her way through broken glass. "Hey, Sam," she said. "Look. I know we haven't really talked. And I get it if you don't want to. But I was thinking maybe we could get coffee?" There was a long beat before I answered. "Okay," I said finally. "One coffee." We met at a little cafe downtown, the kind that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. It was raining that day, soft and steady, turning the windows into blurry watercolor paintings. Valerie was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, fiddling with her phone. She looked different than I remembered. Tired. Older. Like life hadn't exactly been kind to her either. "Hey," she said, standing up awkwardly. I gave her a tight nod and sat down. For a while, we just sipped our coffee in silence, the tension sitting between us like a third person. Finally, she set her cup down with a soft clink. "I'm sorry," she said, voice rough. "For knowing. For not saying anything. For everything." I stared at the chipped rim of my cup. "I used to think he hated you because you reminded him of Mom," she continued. "After she left, he wasn't the same." I looked up sharply. "Mom left?" Valerie blinked, confused. "You didn't know?" I shook my head. I'd been 4 years old when she died, that's what Dad always said. An accident. Car crash. Valerie's face paled. "No, Sam. She didn't die in an accident. She left. She packed a bag one night and never came back. Dad told everyone she died because he couldn't stand the shame." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. All those years, grieving someone who was still out there somewhere. Building my identity around a lie. Why would he lie? I asked, my voice shaking. Valerie shrugged helplessly. Because it was easier to make her a martyr than admit he wasn't enough to keep her. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the rain-smeared street, my mind reeling. My whole life had been a story Dad wrote, and I never even knew it. Later, after we parted ways with stiff hugs and promises to stay in touch that neither of us really believed, I sat in my car for a long time, just letting the truth sink in. I thought about Mom. Where was she now? Did she ever think about me? Did she wonder what happened to the little boy she left behind? I drove home in a daze, barely noticing the traffic lights or the other cars. That night, I pulled out the list again, running my fingers over the ink. For the first time, it didn't feel like a death sentence. It felt like a door. A door I could choose to walk through or leave behind. Jasper curled up at my feet as I sat on the floor, staring at the paper, thinking about the life I wanted, not the one Dad thought I deserved. I didn't have answers yet. I didn't know if I wanted to find Mom. I didn't know if Valerie and I could ever really rebuild anything. But for the first time in a long time, I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't a mistake. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake, the list on the floor beside me, Jasper breathing softly at my feet. Every time I closed my eyes, memories flickered through my mind like old film reels. Birthdays where Dad forgot to show up. Soccer games where he sat in the car, engine running, never coming to the sidelines. I thought about what Valerie said, about Mom leaving, not dying. The grief I felt wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull and heavy, like a stone lodged somewhere deep inside me. The next morning, I pulled out my laptop and did something I'd never dared to do before. I searched for her. I typed in her name, Marianne Alcott, feeling stupid and desperate at the same time. There weren't many results. A few old addresses, a couple of public records. It took me almost an hour of digging before I found a social media profile. It hadn't been updated in years, but the picture was clear enough. It was her. Older. Lines around her eyes. Gray streaks in her dark hair. But it was her. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. There was an email listed in the contact section. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What would I even say? Hi, remember me? The son you left behind 30 years ago? I closed the laptop without writing anything. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The next few weeks passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Work, therapy, long walks with Jasper. Coffee alone on Saturday mornings, sitting by the big window at the cafe, watching the world move around me. Valerie sent a few texts, short, awkward check-ins, but I wasn't ready to answer yet. I didn't know if I ever would be. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself driving without really meaning to. The streets blurred past, and before I knew it, I was standing in front of the house on Willow Street where Dad raised us. It was empty now. Bank-owned. A foreclosure notice peeling in the window. I stood there for a long time, hands shoved deep in my jacket pockets, staring at the sagging porch, the cracked walkway. The house looked smaller somehow. Shrinking into itself. I remembered being 6 years old, sitting on the porch steps, clutching a scraped knee, waiting for Dad to come home and patch me up. He never did. Aunt Margot found me hours later, half asleep and shivering. I didn't cry. Not then, and not now. I just stood there, breathing in the cold, letting it settle into my bones. Then I turned and walked away. Therapy sessions got harder before they got better. I told Dr. Lowell about finding Mom's profile. About the email I hadn't sent. She listened quietly, tapping her pen against her knee. "What are you afraid of?" she asked finally. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling. "That she won't remember me," I said. "Or worse, that she will, and she won't care." Dr. Lowell nodded like she understood something deeper than I could put into words. "You've already survived the worst kind of abandonment, Sam," she said. "Whatever happens, you'll survive this too." It sounded true. I wanted it to be true. One evening in late June, after a long walk with Jasper through Hubbard Park, I sat on my couch, staring at the laptop again. I opened a new email. "Hi Marianne," I typed. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. Then I kept going. "I think you're my mother. I'm not sure what I'm hoping to find by writing this. I just thought you should know that I exist. I'm okay. I made it. Even if you didn't want me, I'm here. Sam." I hovered over the send button, heart hammering against my ribs. Then I hit send. I closed the laptop and sat back, breathing hard like I'd just run a marathon. Nothing exploded. The world didn't tilt off its axis. I was still here. Still breathing. The reply came 3 days later. Just a simple line in the subject bar, Sam. My hand shook as I opened it. "Sam, I think about you every day. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. But if you want to talk, I'm here." Marianne. I reread it a dozen times. It didn't erase the past. It didn't magically make things whole. But it was something. A crack of light in a door I thought was locked forever. I didn't write back immediately. I needed time. To think. To breathe. To figure out what parts of my past I was willing to carry forward, and what parts one needed to finally put down. Some nights, I sat on the porch with Jasper, staring up at the stars, thinking about everything and nothing at once. Other nights, I let the darkness settle around me like a blanket, not fighting it. I wasn't okay. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way people mean when they say that. But I was better. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. Summer in Vermont is short and sweet, like a deep breath before the long cold sets in again. I spent most of it working during the week and wandering on weekends. Sometimes I'd drive aimlessly, past old farms and little towns where nobody knew my name. Other times, I'd sit in the park with a book I barely read, letting Jasper doze in the sun at my feet. All the while, the email from Marianne stayed in the back of my mind. She hadn't written again. She hadn't pushed. She had simply said she was there, and then waited. It was a strange feeling, someone giving me space instead of guilt. By August, the knot in my chest had loosened just enough that I thought maybe, just maybe, I could take the next step. I sat at my kitchen table one evening, staring at my phone. Finally, I typed a short message, "Hi. Would you want to meet for coffee?" The reply came quickly. Yes. Anytime. We chose a little cafe halfway between Barton and Burlington, neutral ground. I drove there in silence, both hands tight on the wheel, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting by the window. She stood when she saw me. There was a moment, a heartbeat, where we just looked at each other. Marianne wasn't what I had pictured. She was shorter than I remembered, her hair clipped close to her jaw, glasses perched on her nose. She wore a blue sweater and simple jeans. Ordinary. Human. Not the ghost I had built in my mind. "Sam," she said, her voice cracking around the edges. I nodded stiffly. We sat down. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. We sipped coffee and stared out the window like two strangers forced to share a table. Finally, she cleared her throat. "I don't know where to start," she said. I shrugged. "Me either." She smiled sadly. "I guess. I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not coming back. I thought it was better for you if I stayed away." I frowned. "Better how?" She looked down at her hands, picking at the sleeve of her sweater. "Your father," she said quietly. He wasn't kind to me. Or to you." I swallowed hard. "I thought if I left, it would be easier for you. That he would be forced to be a better father if I wasn't there." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I was wrong," she whispered. I sat back, feeling like I'd been punched. All those years I spent thinking I wasn't good enough, that I hadn't been worth staying for, and she had thought she was saving me. It didn't erase the hurt. It didn't make everything okay. But it shifted something inside me. "I needed you," I said quietly. "I know," she said. "I know that now. And I'm so sorry, Sam." We sat there in the low hum of the cafe, the rain starting to fall outside. Not rebuilding. Not erasing the past. But maybe, just maybe, starting something new. The weeks after that meeting were strange. We didn't become instantly close. There were no overnight miracles. But we emailed. Sometimes called. Talked about small things, books we liked, recipes we tried, the weather. We built something slow and careful, like patching together a quilt from scraps. Meanwhile, things with Valerie stayed complicated. She texted sometimes. Short updates. Apologies hidden between the lines. One afternoon, she sent a longer message. I found some of Mom's old letters in Dad's attic. "Do you want them?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yes. A few days later, a small cardboard box showed up at my door. Inside were a handful of yellowed envelopes, each addressed to Dad in a looping, careful hand. I sat on the floor with Jasper, slowly pulling them out one by one. Most of them were postmarked from places far away, Tennessee, Oregon, even California. In every letter, Marianne had written about missing me. About wanting to see me. About asking Dad to let her visit. His replies weren't there. Maybe he never wrote back. Or maybe he just threw her letters into a box and buried them in the attic along with every other thing he didn't want to deal with. I felt a cold, hollow anger simmer in my chest. All this time, I thought she abandoned me willingly. But he made sure I never knew she was trying to come back. I called Valerie that night. When she answered, her voice was tense, like she'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop. "You knew about the letters," I said, no accusation in my voice, just tiredness. "I found them after he died," she said quietly. "I didn't know before." I believed her. Mostly. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Sam," she said. "For everything." "I know," I said. And I did. But sorry didn't fix 30 years of silence. Sorry didn't erase the things that were lost. It was a start, though. A small one. That fall, the leaves in Vermont turned every shade of gold and fire. I walked through the parks with Jasper, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the world shift around me. Life wasn't perfect. It wasn't even easy. But it was mine. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was starting to believe that was enough. The first snow fell early that year. One morning in mid-November, I woke up to find the world outside coated in soft white, the air so still it felt sacred. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few months. About the house in Barton. About the list. About Marianne. About Dad. He was gone, but his voice still lingered in my head sometimes, sharp, dismissive, final. Not worth it. And part of me, the old part, still wanted to prove him wrong. Not by shouting. Not by fighting. But by living well. That would be my revenge. I started small. I blocked Valerie's number for a while, not because I hated her, but because I needed space. Real space, not the kind where guilt creeps through the cracks. I spent weekends working on furniture projects for my woodworking class. I made a coffee table that actually stood straight, and a bookshelf for my living room that didn't collapse under the weight of more than 3 books. I saved up and moved into a better apartment, still small, but warm and filled with light. A place that felt like mine. I fostered another dog, a shy golden retriever named Daisy, who took weeks just to come out from under the couch. Jasper loved her immediately. I kept emailing Marianne. Sometimes we talked about meeting again, but we didn't rush it. We both knew how fragile this thing between us was. How careful we had to be not to crush it under the weight of old grief. By Christmas, I was not healed, exactly. But better. Different. I hadn't planned on doing anything special. I figured I'd spend the day eating frozen pizza and watching movies with Jasper and Daisy. But a week before Christmas, I got a letter. A real one. In the mail. It was from the Barton Bank. Inside was a formal notification that my father's old savings account had finally been processed and cleared, a technicality after the house was foreclosed. Enclosed was a check. $15,487.92. My name was on it. It was the last thing he ever gave me. $15,000 of cold, bitter finality. I sat there staring at the check, feeling 1,000 emotions flicker through me: anger, sadness, disbelief. Then I started to laugh. A real laugh this time. Loud and wild and full of something dangerously close to joy. 15 grand from a man who thought I was worth nothing. What would he have hated more than me using it to build a life he never thought I deserved? In January, I used the money to open my own small business. A workshop tucked into a cozy space downtown, with big windows that let in all the light. I called it Second Chance Woodworks. Simple, honest, mine. I made custom furniture, tables, chairs, bookshelves. People from the community started coming in, curious at first, then supportive. I even hired a part-time assistant, a college kid named Rory who reminded me a little of myself, quiet, uncertain, hungry for something better. I made sure he knew every day that he was worth it. Word spread faster than I expected. By spring, I had a waiting list 3 months long. One afternoon, as I was sketching out plans for a new dining table, the door chimed and I looked up. It was Valerie. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a small plant in a ceramic pot. "For your shop," she said, voice hesitant. I wiped my hands on a rag and took the plant. It was a peace lily. I smiled a little. "Thanks." We stood there for a second, the past heavy between us. Then she asked, "Can I see what you're working on?" I hesitated, then nodded. I showed her the workshop, the piles of wood, the rough blueprints pinned to the walls. She listened carefully, actually listened, without interrupting or trying to make it about her. When she left, she hugged me, tight and a little desperate. "I'm proud of you, Sam," she said into my shoulder. For once, I believed her. That night, I emailed Marianne. Told her about the shop. About the plant. About how, somehow, life was starting to feel like mine again. She replied almost immediately. "Sam, I hope you know how proud I am of you. You are not a mistake. You never were. Love, Mom." Sometimes, revenge doesn't look like slamming doors or screaming matches. Sometimes, revenge is waking up every morning in a life you chose, not one you were forced into. Sometimes, revenge is building something beautiful out of the pieces meant to break you. I stood outside my shop one evening, watching the sunset bleed across the sky, the warm lights glowing through the windows behind me. Jasper and Daisy sat by my feet. The air smelled like fresh sawdust and possibility. I breathed it all in. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Not even Dad. He didn't win. I did.